Welcome back to the YEC Podcast, everybody. I'm here with Adam Geha. And I think this interview, I've kind of structured it in a time-like structure, just so that's easier to go through and understand your experiences. So just to start off, could you tell us like how useful your high school experience was? And did you always have an entrepreneurial mindset?
Right. Well, hi there, Aiden, and thank you for having me on the podcast. The first thing is to talk about high school. I suppose I think my experience of high school was quite ambivalent in that I loved learning. I didn't particularly like marks and tests, though I was very scholastically inclined. I was conscientious. I ended up, being in the top 20 in the state in the HSC. But I was also very close to being disqualified for missing too many days from high school, especially in year 11 and 12. And that's because I found it easier to study at home at my own pace. I didn't really see the need for a teacher to read to me what was in the book. I found it easy enough to read the book, understand it, and get on with it. I didn't enjoy the hand-holding of school. I didn't enjoy being patronized. I didn't enjoy an overly structured environment. I remember hating the bells ringing at the end and at the beginning of class. I found that all almost like a prison. So I was extremely happy to leave high school. But I also, I had a very, I was very successful as a student. I was I enjoyed school. I enjoyed my colleagues. I just didn't like the system.
Yeah.
Did it help me become an entrepreneur? I suspect not. I think school probably, if anything, teaches you how not to be entrepreneurial, because if you think about what high school represents, it's you're set a fixed assignment and you have a deadline to perform it in. So I would call that a finite game. To use Simon Sinek's analogy, it's a finite game, highly structured rules. There's marks, there's deadlines, whereas life and the entrepreneurial journey is very unstructured. It's an infinite game. And you get to define the game. You don't have to play by anyone's rules. You can play by the rules that you create. As long as you solve a real world problem, you can go about doing it in whichever way works best for you.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. We were doing HSC last year and missing a whole term due to lockdown. A lot of my friends and top achievers of our year actually said they preferred being at home and doing stuff at home. Similar experience to yours. Obviously, you can get along with stuff. That's also why homeschooling is becoming such a prominent thing, rather than doing everything at everyone else's pace. So yeah. And then you went on to study economics law at UCID. Great degree. I'm doing commerce law, so similar.
Great.
How was your uni experience? And again, how did it shape?
A lot happier. I also excelled academically. I was the top student in economics law. After 3 years, I then did honors in economics, got the university medal, and then I got 3 jobs while I was at uni. So I got bored after 4 years of academia, and I basically stopped turning up to lectures. I would just turn up every week and photocopy people's lecture notes and try and figure it out from there. So academically, I think I reveled at university because I was a self-learner from way back. So all of the things that made me a rebellious student at high school, meaning I just rebelled against the system and its rules, actually made me a very natural university student, because I was a self-taught. I from an early age, I learned that the trick was you needed to figure out how to teach yourself things rather than wait for people to spoon feed you. Yeah, I really did enjoy the freedom, the fact that I didn't have to turn up if I didn't want to. And I just had to make adult decisions where I decided I was going to have 3 jobs and not turn up to uni in the last 2 years. I just had to accept the consequences of that. which meant that my grades went down a little bit, but I was picking up massive knowledge from the 3 jobs, and they ended up, I think, being much better for me in the longer term.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. I understand a lot of people try or actually change uni to part-time and get jobs because they find the job is better off for them and giving them more knowledge than simply just studying their degree.
Exactly.
Yeah. So then after uni, you went on to study, or you went on to work at Macquarie Bank for around 5 years. Could you tell us a bit just about what your job entailed there?
Yeah, so I applied, instead of doing a summer clerkship in a law firm, which is what most of my peers did, I ended up doing summer vacation employment at Macquarie. I was offered a job, so I never really interviewed as such. I ended up, back in those days, it was the days of, the movie Wall Street. It's probably, it predates you. But there was a popular movie called Wall Street with a character called Gordon Gekko, who famously gave a speech, one of the famous Hollywood speeches where he says, "Greed is good." And it was kind of about the glorification of investment banking. So I was very interested with this idea. Investment bankers at the time were seen as masters of the universe. It had become the most coveted of the professions and the most highly paid. So I was drawn to it because I felt it had the excitement that I wanted, the entrepreneurial excitement, while still playing to the analytical part of my nature. And I ended up in mergers and acquisitions. So that's the division that I wanted to be in. And then after a year and a half, I met a guy called John Calden, who was then the deputy MD of Macquarie. I met him at a cocktail function, a Macquarie cocktail function. And he was a remarkable character, sadly passed away last year from lung cancer. And I immediately connected with him at a spiritual level. He was a very inspirational person, very generous, very kind, and also a brilliant investment banker. So a very unusual combination. And I remember he recited a line of poetry from Ode to a Grecian Urn, which is a John Keats poem. And I completed it. And he was quite surprised that like a 26-year-old kid who'd studied economics law knew poetry. And so we connected. We're both lovers of poetry and philosophy. We're both very interested in religion. I'm a mystic. He was an atheist. But we both had a strong interest in religion. So we connected at a philosophical level. He then said to me, "Would you like to come and work with me?" I said, "I'd love to." I've always taken the view it matters less what I do, matters more who I do it with. And the most important thing in career is to navigate your way to your immediate leader. Has to be someone whose competence and character you admire. So I figured out I wasn't particularly happy until I found the leader that I admired. Once I found the leader I admired, I realized that just being in their company, watching how they operated, would inspire me to do bigger and better things, which is exactly what happened. I spent about 2.5, 3 years with John at Macquarie. He then resigned. I told him I was thinking of resigning, and he said, "Why don't you come and work with me?" So I worked for another maybe year at Macquarie, and then went and joined him. So I spent 2 years, roughly a year and a half in mergers and acquisitions, and 3.5 years in infrastructure finance.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about you're having an inspiring leader or someone you connect to, especially on your Instagram, which we'll discuss, your LinkedIn, which we'll discuss later, is very prominent. And you share your thoughts on that quite often. And also just quickly, in a couple of words, could you provide us an insight into just the culture at Macquarie Bank?
Macquarie had a really great culture back in 95 to 2000. It was still a relatively small bank. So I would say that very intelligent people, so they chose sort of the creme de la creme out of the university cohorts, they looked for ambitious, driven, entrepreneurial people. And the culture was very empowering in that it basically invited people to come up with ideas. The motto was freedom within boundaries. Where I was, where I disconnected was that there was a joke about Macquarie's logo came from something called the Holy Dollar, HOLEY, Holy Dollar, because Governor Macquarie, the first form of financial innovation in Australia was they were running out of coins. So he punched a hole in the coins that they had and made the holy coin worth, whatever, 5 times. And the smaller coin was worth 1/5. So he effectively created money without needing to go into another production run. And so that was kind of the symbol of Macquarie financial innovation, thinking outside the square, as did Governor Macquarie. But I think sadly over time, it was slowly becoming the Holy Dollar, HOLY. It was, and I think part of that was the mythology around investment banking in Hollywood was, as I said, with the Wall Street movie, Masters of the Universe. So it was creating a hubris of a kind, which I think still afflicts the profession. But I think the whole, the gestalt of the 80s was all about, money, 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 and measuring people by the size of their bonus, so measuring people by the size of their bonus, and so the investment banking, kind of hubris was that the bigger the pay packet, the better your life, the more important you were. And I liked money. I still very much like to make money, but it just wasn't something I could strive for in and of itself. I just couldn't turn up and just be driven by the size of my next year's bonus.
Yeah.
So I think at that level, I disconnected. And therefore, I really only hung around at Macquarie. And I actually openly said it, which is, a political faux pas, of grand proportions. I said 2 years out from leaving Macquarie, I intend to leave Macquarie, and that I'm only here basically to gather the necessary experience to go off and do my own thing. So I signaled my intent early.
Yeah, okay. So obviously you then went from working for, or at the time, a smaller corporation, now much bigger, to co-founding the company Willow, which you're still, I understand, presently on the board and Willow
happened after EG, by the way. So the chronology in that sense needs to be corrected.
Okay.
I
found
after EG.
Okay.
I start EG, and initially that's with John Calden and Michael Eason. But then John Calden decides he wants to focus on other ventures. So it ends up being, I'm the G, Adam Geha, Michael Eason is the E. And we start more or less in the year 2000. It obviously evolves, but in 2002, we set up a first funds management company, which eventually becomes the modern day EG.
Yeah, okay. So then we'll go into more depth about that. So could you, continue on telling us a bit about EG and its philosophy and some of the recent projects you are undertaking?
Yes, just bear with me. I'm getting a message from my wife.
Yeah,
I'll be finished. I'll be with you at 6. I'll be able to. I think we'll be finished in 20 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Sorry, Aiden. Could you repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. Just going on with EG. Could you just tell us a bit about it? Continue and its philosophy and some recent.
Yes, EG is kind of the intersection of my upbringing in an entrepreneurial household where my father was a property developer. So I was steeped in residential development, but my father also developed office buildings and also a hotel. So I kind of grew up on development side. So I had an intuitive understanding of real estate.
And then the Macquarie Bank experience was giving, sort of top end finance analytics. So the intersection of those two things kind of logically was real estate funds management. And that's effectively that
my primary career has been in building a real estate fund manager. We now manage over $5 billion in commercial real estate. And we've got a pipeline of about $4 billion in property developments. So we've built, a fund manager of scale, certainly in the Australian market, and in the latter 5 years or so, we've become involved in prop tech. The first of which was Willow.
Yeah. Okay. And obviously, now being a co-founder, you get to put into the company the culture that you strive for, the one that you want. So could you tell us a bit about the culture you're trying to...
I mean, that's kind of the reason why I would have stayed at Macquarie if I was completely at peace with the culture. As I said, I loved 3/4 of it. I just couldn't get comfortable with worshipping the holy dollar. And I also wanted something that was more, more passionately committed to family values. So I'm very family oriented. I'm Lebanese, Christian Lebanese, and I, came from a very, very closely knit family. We lived through the Civil War. So I very, I love working with people who are devoted to their mum and dad, devoted to their spouse and to their children. So I founded EG on those principles, that money was very important, but it wasn't the most important. Our motto is relationships really matter, and they matter more than money. So when we're given the choice between preserving relationships or making money, we have a track record of choosing relationships over money.
Yeah.
And so we have very tightly knit relationships. I've got a whole bunch of people who have been with me for over 10 years, and they're like brothers and sisters to me.
Yeah.
So it's got a kind of very the loyalties run deep at EG. We kind of got each other's back. If someone's going through a difficult time, we don't look at the contract. I remember early on, one of my colleagues, who's still with us actually, had a premature baby. I said, look, I want you to be with the baby for as long as you need to be, and you'll be on full pay. And that was at a time when the business was broadly break even, so, we weren't making a profit. It just was, it was a time to express solidarity with a colleague. And I think that resonated with him a lot. And he still remembers it to this day as a seminal moment in terms of who we are and what we stood for. I was effectively at that point, the slogan had become a reality.
Yeah. I think, speaking about your motto, you said relationships really matter. You then went on to fund, I think it was the BIG, or Big Foundation. Yeah.
Right.
Can you tell us a bit about
It's now
that?
called Little Big Foundation. But yes, at the time it was called the BIG Foundation. And BIG stands for Build in Good. So the Little Big Foundation, the philosophy of it is that to have a big impact, you need to be humble enough to accept that it is the little things repeatedly done over years and decades that generate the massive results because of the compounding nature of habits. So if you want to be good at relationships, you've actually got to be good at the little things. So the grand gestures are good, but they rarely produce the depth and longevity of a long-term relationship. So Little Big is really an outworking of the EG culture. So we've spent 22 years experimenting on corporate culture to try and get a best of breed culture. We were voted the number 7 best place to work in Australia last year. We punch way above our weight when it comes to corporate culture. in so many ways. Like we've got a hobby program. If people participate in the hobby program, we pay for 70% of the hobby. It alternates every year from sporting-based hobby to a culture-based hobby, like singing, dancing, language, music, etc., instruments, calligraphy, pottery, etc. And if people participate in the hobby program, not only do we pay 70% of the hobby, we also give that staff member an additional 2 weeks of annual leave.
Yeah, okay.
We also have a sabbatical program where 1/7 of the workforce that's been with us for 3 years or more, 1/7 of the workforce that's been with us for 3 years or more gets 3 months of paid leave. And that's, so every 7 years, we like you to have a sabbatical.
Yeah.
And that's where you go off and do something completely different and effectively get a refresher to your, because we all live in a bit of a bubble, and you sometimes just need someone to splash some water on your face.
Yeah.
These are just examples of how the culture works. When people have their first child, we buy them the pram. We've got a very generous maternity leave policy. We've got, if somebody falls sick, as somebody did recently, actually her husband got a stroke. We reached out to her, we sent her Uber Eat vouchers to make sure that her children had lots of food. We came over to help her with any household chores. We also sent her the message that she could stay for as long as she wanted with her husband on full pay. It's, the stuff you can afford to do when you're not using other people's money.
Yeah.
You can express yourself with a certain largesse.
Yeah, well, yeah, I can see how you ranked 7th last year for best places to work. I don't know what the places higher than you are doing, because it sounds phenomenal.
Yeah, I don't think the rankings don't matter much. Yeah. I think the what's more important actually than all of those programs is building a culture of deep trust between people and humility and the ability to feel safe to express vulnerability. There's a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni that I highly rate. And it's become a bit of a cultural touchstone at YEC. And we ask every person who joins us to read the book. In my view, Patrick Lencioni is the foremost authority globally on corporate culture. And he's written, a lot of great books, but his bestseller is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah. So I quite liked how to look at your website. You had an analogy of like a coffee shop, for example. It was saying that you live somewhere, you go to work somewhere, but the coffee shop isn't where you are often, but you feel at home there, whether it's the smell of coffee or talking to the barista or the small chat you have. But I think incentivizing people to do these hobbies and undertake these programs, etc., will develop a culture which I'm sure you're seeking the rewards of.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we're building a culture for 2 reasons. One is for retention. We got an excellent record there. But more importantly, I think, quite apart from retention and any monetary incentive, it goes to the core of my satisfaction in working. I feel like if I work with a bunch of people who I'm invested in emotionally, who I buy their stories, I want them to succeed, it motivates me when I'm around people who I like, whose personal stories I buy into and whose dreams and aspirations matter to me. It enriches me. So I feel like I need to do it. Otherwise, I think I'll just get bored. I mean, I made enough money to retire 10 years ago. So the only reason to turn up is because I want to enjoy working with a bunch of people who I highly rate.
Yeah, no, definitely. So let's move on to now Willow. So you co-founded that with 4 other people, it was? Could you just tell us a bit about that?
4 co-founders. So Michael and I already partners at YEC. There's a guy called Joshua Ridley who
I met about 10 years ago, and when he left his employ and sent out an email to the world saying he's moving on to do other things, I reached out to him and offered him a free desk in our office, and I said, come and work with us. You're in real estate, we're in real estate, and I'd like to be helpful to you in helping you to resurrect, to initiate the next chapter of his career. And I kind of, in the back of my mind, I thought he would be an interesting guy to get to know. And I knew that there would be a chance if he came into the office that there'd be a spark and we might end up working together, which is what ultimately happened. A couple of years, about a year and a half into his journey in our office, he asked me whether I would become a partner, and I said that I was happy to do so based on what I've observed of him as a character and what I saw him, going through, the highs and lows of small business. And I said, look, I've seen you make money. A lot of people are good when they're making money, but I've seen you under pressure and losing money, and you've kept your wits about you, and you haven't, gotten too low about it. And I said, I like people who keep their composure through good and bad times. So we ended up together in a business called Ridley, named after him. It was doing architectural documentation offshore. So effectively an executive architect role, but as the hidden helper. We then pivoted the business to become the premier architectural firm, executive architecture firm in Australia, assisting international brands that didn't have the capability domestically. And then we pivoted the business again to become the premier purveyor of a technology back then called BIM, Building Information Management, or Building Information Modeling. And it was called 6D modeling, because you include architecture, structure, but you also include mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and all of the other services like security, access, etc. It's all modeled in 3D in one model. It's like a single source of truth. And when we became well known in the BIM industry, we started thinking about how BIM could eventually become a tool that could help you manage the asset post-construction. And so then we cottoned on to this idea of the digital twin. And then together with Microsoft, Ridley had then got rebranded as Willow, and is now at the forefront of the digital twin technology to try and use effectively a digital replica of the real asset to help people manage the asset in real time post-construction.
Yeah, I had a watch of the video on the website about the SoFi Stadium, excuse my pronunciation, I think that's what it was, in California.
Yeah.
And they were appreciative of the fact that Josh, one of the co-founders, came out to them to explain the technology. So what's your view on like interpersonal skills and the fact that he went all the way to California to provide them with this information about the digital twin, which was up and coming at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Joshua is a master salesperson. He's very skilled in that regard and has great interpersonal skills. Obviously, on a size of deal like that, I don't think it's unusual that someone would travel and pitch. I think what's unusual and what helps people connect with us is that we're real, we're authentic, we deeply and passionately care about our clients' objectives, and we'll go out of our way to do good for the client. Like, it matters to us, to be good to the client and to deliver on our promises. And we're patient, because if relationships really matter, then you should be patient in the way you expect a client to onboard to a new technology. And digital twins, 5 years ago, were virtually unheard of. We were really we kind of almost co-authored the category with Microsoft.
It's now become a term of art, but back then it was virtually unheard of. And so we needed to be patient with the early adopters, which we were. And now many of them are our loyal customers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, well, I've had a look at the technology and it's actually, I didn't actually know about it before. So it's opened my eyes up to up and coming technology. Well, it's actually pretty big right now. Let's move on to your LinkedIn, which you have quite a big presence. You have about 15,000 followers when I last looked. I've got aside one of my favorite posts you've done because I find you always putting forward ideas, quotes, inspiration, a range of things, and you're quite active on there. So this was one of my ones. You said, a note to young professionals looking for a recipe for happiness at work, question mark. 1, work with amazing people, and 2, do amazing work. If you must choose between the two, choose the former. Could you give us a bit of an insight into this? As we've seen you, the key to your success also is working with amazing people and fostering a caring culture.
I mean, it's a good way to segue into philosophy, but it's you know, I think we started the interview talking about relationships really matter and values matter, culture matters. What I'm saying in that post is there's really only 2 things that really govern your sense of well-being and satisfaction at work. You've got to be doing work that you feel is meaningful. And by meaningful, I mean that it's got to be meaningful to you, that the service or product you're giving to the world, you feel is genuinely making a positive difference in the world. I think that's a real issue. For example, if you work for a tobacco company or you work for a coal mine, but you're struggling with how to make sense of that in terms of its impact, you shouldn't do that because it's corrosive to your sense of well-being. If you don't do something, you can't just do work just to pay the bills. You've got to do it to feed your soul. So you've got to do work. Most work is meaningful, by the way, because it adds value and it's generally positive. It's obviously customers wouldn't buy your product or service unless they thought it was adding value. But the work's got to be meaningful to you, and you should not settle for anything other than highly meaningful work. But then you've got to do it with a bunch of people who you highly rate, and you've got to highly rate them both in terms of competence and character. And I'm just saying that if you ask me, you know, what of those 2 is going to determine my enjoyment more, I would say I could do virtually anything as long as it wasn't unethical or immoral, as long as I was doing it with a bunch of great people, because great people add to you on so many levels. They add to you, obviously professionally, but also emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. So I use the line that I'm happy to do geology. You know, I'll be, as long as I'm surrounded by a bunch of great people who I work with every day, because then we will be innovative. We'll probably invent new technologies. We'll go off all over the world trying to export it. So we'll have fun just doing it together. And I like doing stuff together. I very much enjoy working with closely knit teams that share a common vision and values.
Yeah. Quickly, we've got the last 5 minutes left, which is perfect because we're on the last question. Could you just tell us, this is quite a broad one, quickly, the hardest decision you've had to make and the most rewarding thing you've experienced in your career?
Yeah, I mean, I had a hard decision today because there's a fintech that we've supported. That's, you know, we supported them 6 months ago. They've done an outstanding job. They lend to SaaS companies, so that's software companies with recurring revenue, just to provide them with a bit more runway ahead of them raising capital. And so they've done very well. The first 6 months they've been outstanding, but the market forces now are so negative on the technology sector, and multiples have crashed. The VC market has virtually dried up, that they've gone out to market to get more money to keep growing, but there's really very little money on offer for that type of cash burning startup, especially one that wants to lend to other technology startups. So what we were debating whether we should mothball or abandon,
given that the timing is so inauspicious. But I said, actually, it was a difficult decision, but I said, you know what, I'm prepared to double down because the team is amazing, because the execution so far has been terrific, because what appears to be an adversity in the sense that the market has turned so negative on cash burning tech startups, we will be able now to afford to pick, cherry pick the best risk return profile, because the banks will withdraw. So perfectly good credits will be starved of funding. So we'll be able to, I think, move down the risk curve and achieve higher returns. So actually our risk return trade-off's gotten better, not worse. And all that we're really combating is a pessimism that is overblown pessimism. And that's a reaction to overblown optimism, because the market has these sentimental swings. So I said, actually, I see it as a time to double down. And I turned to my co-founders in that business and I said, this is why you made the right decision, choosing us as your partner, because I said, we're not fair weather friends. If people do the right thing, we'll be loyal to them. So it was a difficult decision, because maybe the more comfortable and easy decision was to mothball. But I think, this is, you're faced with those moments in business where you've got to make tough decisions. I made one today and I said, we're going to double down and support you.
Yeah. And the most rewarding thing in your career? I think you've kind of answered that throughout the...
I've answered that. Yeah. I mean, that's working with great people. I mean, if that's the dominant theme in our chat today. By far, the most interesting thing you'll do in business is the relationships, the friendships that will accrue as a result of being in the trenches with highly competent people of high character. I mean, the stories, the anecdotes, the quirky late nights, the humor, the banter, the camaraderie, all of that. Basically, most of what I remember of my career is the human element. I can't, I struggle to remember deals, but I certainly remember the friendships, the relationships, the adventures, the funny moments. They're the best. And I'll say probably the best part of the human element of work is watching young talent bloom. Much like we delight in seeing a flower open up and bloom, you even more so, you delight in watching a human being flourish. When they really, when you watch a person of talent open up, both intellectually and emotionally, to the growth experience of their career and to realize their potential. When you see people self-actualizing and you're playing a small part in mentoring that person, you feel the full joy of that moment, even though you are just a small part of it.
Yeah. Well, the listeners have got homework to do, whether that's reading the book you've suggested and have understood through our chat the key elements of being an entrepreneur. And it's not only about money, it's about lots of other things, as we've discussed. So overall, thanks for the great chat, and I'll see all the listeners soon.